So we have another speaker tonight, Kayne, and that's McGladrey. McGladrey was his
Got
last
it in
name.
one.
McGladrey, yeah, it's my
It's
people. You're my
me.
people. CISO in residence at Hyperproof, dynamic and award-winning cybersecurity leader, 25 years plus experience advising enterprises, and you are a trusted media voice and keynote speaker. I did see that you got. Is it a podcast? I saw YouTube. I was checking that out earlier. So
A couple of those as
um,
well.
all right, fantastic. I'm going to stop sharing that and I'm going to make you the spotlight and make you a co-host so you can share some things with everybody here.
Cool. I have just dropped a thing in the chat. I think everybody here understands how the chat works, so we're going to get on swimmingly. I try to make these things fairly interactive. Let me just share my screen here. And there we are. Okay. Just somebody confirm to me, screen's showing on screen.
Yes, we're good.
Awesome. Really love to hear that. Okay, cool. We're going to be moving pretty quickly. So first thing I want to say is, two things before we go ahead and we get started. First of all, my counsel says that I'm supposed to say that none of what you're about to hear is legal advice. It's not investment advice. It's not any specific statement about any company or any organization that I'm affiliated with. Actually, this is all just observations based on best practices and on personal experiences. Second, drop it in the chat. How many people here went to college? Go ahead and drop it in the chat if you went to college. Or if you went to university, just drop university in the chat. And while we're doing that, just kind of get a sense of who's here. If you're a senior cybersecurity leader, CISO, BISO, VP, that type person, go ahead and drop that in the chat too. I'm seeing some people went to uni, some Rutgers, some UB, cool, Tulane. Wow, we're getting some all kinds of things here. Awesome. Okay, I kind of have a sense of who's in the room. Love that. So I dropped, there we go. Cool, I dropped out of college. And you might have heard about imposter syndrome. So guess how I usually feel about 5 minutes before I go on stage, right? I was in the theater program first year, and I thought at age 18 that I would never be on stage in front of an audience. So thankfully, that's how I got into cybersecurity. Again, my name's Kayne. I'm a professional speaker. I'm an author. I'm the CISO in residence at Hyperproof. I'm a senior IEEE member, and I'm the #1 thought leader on cybersecurity and risk management worldwide. When I used to come to events like this, I would try to take all the notes. It was part of being self-taught. So I'd sit in the front row and I'd try and write everything down. Later today, I'm going to flash everybody a different QR code to download the best slides and some bonus materials as a PDF. And if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, that's the QR code. We're going to be going through a lot today at a high level. And the reason you're probably here today is you're trying to navigate cyber risk in today's business landscape. And if you're like everyone else, you're probably struggling to best address cyber threats as a core business issue. As my lights change, there we go, fix that. And you need to be able to communicate the business impacts, both positive and negative, of cybersecurity inside of your organization, while at the same time avoiding some of the financial losses associated with cyber incidents. So today we're going to focus on understanding, translating, and then prioritizing cyber risk. And I first want to talk about what these so-called cyber risks are, because I'm a CISO. I've been a CISO twice, and I've done executive advisory on 3 continents for Global 1,000 companies. And I'll tell you right now, I don't think cyber risks exist. So just in the chat, yes or no, is storing unencrypted credit card data, is that a risk? Go ahead, drop it in the chat. Yes, no, what do you think? Let's get a sense of the audience. I'm seeing some yeses. Ooh, lots of yeses. It depends. Kind of love this audience. Cool. So let me tell you a story from 2006. And this is a story about credit card readers from before we had tap to pay or chip and pin cards, and about a company that I was advising at that time. And I want to talk about how credit card readers worked back then. Most credit card readers had magnetic stripe technology. So when a card was swiped, the reader would extract the account number, the expiration date, and all the other data from the magnetic stripe. And this information was then typically transmitted in plain text to payment processors through dial-up modems or dedicated phone lines or early broadband connections, and was then processed in plain text. Then it was stored in plain text in databases. And if you think of the Target breach of 2013 or similar incidents, those kind of happened because of the security practices we thought were normal in that era. So here's a list of some of the bad things we can agree on about storing and transmitting unencrypted credit card data. And that led to a standard, PCI DSS. Let me just paraphrase that for you. Just going to scroll down a bit here. Here's the exact language from PCI DSS. I've highlighted the word consider, right? If you read PCI DSS, you'll see nowhere in there does it say maintaining unencrypted credit card holder data poses a risk to data, and it requires additional risk mitigation. The document treats encryption as a risk mitigation measure, implying the lack of encryption creates risk. But here's the thing, it's not explicit. And if you take a literal reading to it, and most attorneys and regulatory compliance are literalists, it's not a risk, which means my client did not see it as a problem for them to go solve because it wasn't a risk to their business. So the client started getting some pressure from some outside forces. They were told they'd be fined $1 million a day if they didn't comply with PCI. Now, this is a company that had net sales of $89.3 billion in 2006 with net income of $3.6 billion, which meant the $1 million fine daily could have been an accounting error, less than half a percentage point, in fact. So nothing changed for about a week, and that external pressure kind of ramped up, this time with threats of $10 million a day. We all can carry you to zero, right? That's 4% of their balance sheet. It's annoying now. It's not really something to do something about other than observe like, hey, it might be a slight headwind for our revenue until the lawyers get everything sorted out, which led to this threat about a week later. No more Visa. The next day, the client punched a hole through the wall of their data center to build an enclave of dedicated systems to just process credit card data. Now, I could not take a photo because of, well, let's just say a lot of reasons, but this is what an AI thought that would have looked like. So I want you to start now thinking about, like, what was the risk there? Because clearly it wasn't storing or transmitting unencrypted credit card data. If it had been, they would have done something. Now, some of you are also probably thinking, that's a really old story, Kayne. Like, things have clearly gotten better in the world, right? Let me ask you this one then, again in the chat. Is a failure to patch a known vulnerability, is that a risk? Go ahead, yes, no, in the chat. Give everyone a moment there. Some of you are going to start getting skeptical of me. I'm saying it depends as a consultant. Potentially, I love that. Cool. So let me tell you a more recent story from 2017. The Equifax data breach first came up in July of 2017, and the breach was caused by attackers exploiting a known vulnerability in Apache Struts, which Equifax had failed to patch despite there being a fix available. And the company didn't disclose that breach until September 2017, which was about a month after discovery. And at the time, it was one of the largest data breaches in history. Now, here's a list of some of the bad things that can happen when companies don't patch their critical systems. But Equifax ran into trouble from the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA. I'm just going to paraphrase the safeguard clause for you here. Just scroll down a smidge. Here's the closest thing GLBA says about patching in 2017. Again, this is the closest thing it says. GLBA doesn't mention patching or software updates or software maintenance anywhere in the text. So while unpatched systems could potentially be considered under the broad categories of software design considerations, or maybe they could lead to system failures, the regulation does not literally or explicitly identify a failure to patch as a risk. And remember, compliance officers, attorneys, they're pretty literal folks, and they don't understand how patching is or is not a risk. So here's some of the bad things that can happen to a business when they're found in violation of GLBA. And here's a list of some of the bad things that happened to Equifax because they were found to have violated GLBA, as well as some FTC rules, as well as some attorneys generals. A bunch of folks weren't happy. But here's the real bad thing. The legal issues and regulatory failures at Equifax led to a landmark settlement that required the company to spend over $1 billion on data and security technology to make comprehensive security reforms. So again, I want you to start thinking about, what was the risk again? Because if it wasn't patching systems, which wasn't a literal requirement, what was the risk? But again, you're thinking, yeah, it's still an old story there, Kayne. Like, we must have collectively learned from our mistakes, right? Right? Let me ask you this one. Is the lack of MFA a risk? Anybody think that's a risk still? Lack of multi-factor authentication? Go ahead, drop it in the chat if you. No, you're all skeptical of me. I see one no. I love this crowd already. Cool. So somebody's still going, yes, they're doubling down on this one. Oh, there are some yeses. Okay, cool, cool, cool. So let me tell you another story. Let me tell you a story from last year, actually. Oh, boy. So the Change Healthcare breach occurred in early 2024, and it disrupted healthcare services across the United States. Based on public information, the alleged initial attack vector was a lack of multi-factor authentication. Now, here's a list of things I think we can all agree on that what happens when, like, you don't use MFA. But Change Healthcare is they're in trouble with HIPAA. I'm going to paraphrase the HIPAA security rule, the privacy rule, and the disclosure rule. Again, I'm just going to scroll down. There's a few words in this document, just one or two. So if you read HIPAA, you'll notice nowhere in there does it say a lack of MFA is a risk. And executives and compliance officers and attorneys, they don't see a lack of MFA as a risk. So here's a list of some of the bad things that can happen if a business potentially or allegedly violated HIPAA. And here's a list of some of the bad things Change Healthcare is currently experiencing from their data breach that affected up to 190 million individuals. Now, there's also multi-district litigation and several separate class action lawsuits and investigations from a few states' attorneys general. So there's not really consolidated numbers saying how much this is going to cost in the end, but it's not going to be great. So if none of those are cyber risks, even though everybody in this audience probably initially thought, wow, this sure feels like a risk, how do we actually define a risk? Well, most CISOs are now realizing we just manage business risks. Okay, cool. If that's true, what do we need to actually manage business risks? I'm just going to paraphrase NIST's risk management framework for some of the things we're going to need. Again, just scroll down. It's a short little document here. Oh, it keeps going. So here's a quick overview of the process I'm about to describe. This is going to be in the downloadable materials that everybody's going to be receiving at the end of this. First thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to define a whole bunch of words. We need to define words like high. And we're going to need to define words like low. And we're going to use those words to start to define the impact of a risk. So here's a risk, an example of an impact statement. Now you might wonder how that risk could happen. And the impact statement doesn't actually say that part, like how it could go and happen. But this is a good risk impact statement. And this is one way that we could write those factors down based on NIST's guidance. What's important here is we've heard from the business about what's bad, and then we've worked out one way it could happen. There's probably more ways for this to go ahead and occur, but we have a consistent format. We also need to do some math. And you might have heard about this term, this residual risk, which is the amount of risk left over after you've applied your controls. We're going to come back to this one in a minute because we haven't defined yet how we're going to measure our control effectiveness. Before we get there, we also need to define the odds of a risk happening before we go and apply those controls. Now, here's one way we could write a probability statement based on the information that we have at hand to try and gauge the odds of a high impact risk coming. Again, this follows a standard format, and this is going to be in the downloadable materials. And if you've been following this space, you've probably seen this formula that you can multiply your probability and your impact, and you're going to come up with some money. Here's the thing. If a risk happens, becomes a material event, your math can be the best math in the world, but nobody's going to care. We don't manage risks because of math. We manage risks to help businesses achieve resiliency so they can keep doing business in spite of risks that might or might not occur, which is why I recommend people prioritize your risks by impact first, not by probability, because we don't have residual risk calculated yet. And we also haven't talked about how to decide on, like, which risks do we do something with. Something else we're going to need is a list of systems. And these are systems in business terms, the collection of components that do stuff for the business. For example, every business has accounts payable, which is how they go and they pay their suppliers. Most businesses negotiate like net 90 terms to pay their suppliers. So a risk that affects their accounts payable means you've got about 3 months to fix whatever bad thing went and transpired. Every business also has accounts receivable, but unlike accounts payable, most businesses tend to have a cycle of about 14 days for accounts receivable. That's the money that comes into the business. So if you have a risk materialize there, you've got about a 2-week window to fix it, because once cash stops coming in, you have problems. Kind of like we saw with Change Healthcare, or my first example about a company not being able to visa across the world anymore. We're also going to need a risk assessment process. Good news here is we don't have to figure this out on our own. NIST's risk management framework and ISOs have all got defined ways of collecting and processing risk data. And so we're going to follow that process to ask people about risks. Because here's the thing. If I went to our sales leader, Mike, and I said, hey, Mike, if our sales system were to go down for a day, we'd lose about $1 million. Mike could laugh me out of his office. Because as a CISO, I don't know how much money comes in on an average given day. And even if I did, I don't know what controls are in place. And even if I did, I don't know how well those controls are being applied. And even if I did, I don't have the staff to go apply additional controls because I'm the CISO, not the sales VP. I don't own that system. CISOs don't own many systems. We can help executives measure their risks, but we don't own those risks. So we need to go talk to people like VPs and system owners and managers and control owners as we go and we follow our process. And we're going to go follow our process to ask people questions about the visible risks, the controls that they're using with those risks, and the effectiveness of those controls, the best estimate. We're going to ask multiple people the same question, and then we're going to follow our process to figure out how to best estimate the risk's residual probability and impacts. The other thing we're going to need to know is a bunch of data, like key performance indicators and key risk indicators and business objectives, because those are going to be used later to help prioritize our risks. And most other organizations will say this, they understand their core business processes better than they understand security. And those existing business metrics, cash flow, supply chain efficiency, production uptime, all those are great when it comes to understanding risk. There's an industrial manufacturer I worked with. They made cardboard boxes for shipping things, and their ops team noticed they had slowdowns at a plant. One of the lines was just running slower than usual, which was a metric they tracked. Meanwhile, the security team, had FBI intel about targeted attacks happening in similar companies. But the ops team, the security team, they never talked, right? So days later, when the ransomware hit, shut down that plant and shut down others, costing them about $1 million a day, which, unlike that first company, was more than an accounting error. They had the data to see something was wrong before the risk materialized, but they didn't have a process to connect the dots. Businesses already track this stuff, these key performance indicators. Security teams have to tap into that data to anticipate and prevent risks, because risk management isn't just about reacting better, it's about using the intelligence we already have to build resilience. The other thing we need to define is what our business's risk tolerance is for every category of risk. Is a $1 million a day loss okay? Is that the end of the company? Right? That helps us to prioritize our risks. So here's a couple examples of risk tolerance statements. You're going to notice they're kind of short, kind of concise, and that's pretty deliberate on that case. Here's what you want to do. You want to write those tolerances down. Better yet, get your executives to sign off on those risk tolerances. Even better still, get your board of directors guidance on this, have them write it down, because then we have a very clear guidance for what's a tolerable risk and for what's a risk that we just can't accept. And all that data goes into a risk register. It's going to contain your risks and impact statements and probabilities that you've calculated after you finish the process, where we ask the people about the risks, the controls, the effectiveness of those controls, the data showing that the controls are actually operating, and a series of risk tolerance statements that were approved. Some of you have seen a risk register, right? It looks like this is a table form. The underlying data isn't even vaguely a table, and this sure as heck is not a spreadsheet, because we ingest a lot of data and we manage the provenance of those data, as well as who wrote them, right? As well as when they were last edited, so that it's verifiable and so that it can actually be audited. We've got a lot of data. We put it into this risk register thing now. So how do we go talk to executives and get them to make a decision? Because that's kind of the whole point of this exercise, is decisions to do something. So your first goal should be this, should be easy. We should always frame risks in terms of systems that they care about. Systems like accounts payable and accounts receivable. You might remember this one, right? The risk register with those systems like AP and AR. Yeah, don't show them this. A lot of CISOs make that mistake exactly once. There's too much information, and it's not been prioritized, and it's not been sorted. They don't know what to go look at. They might never have seen a risk register before. It's unfair to them. So you might have seen something like this. Here's all those data as a heat map. Executives here don't have context about what to look at. We got some pretty colors and some dots. We've thrown all the risks up on screen for them. But again, new CISOs make this mistake exactly once. You might remember this word, tolerance, right? You need to apply that to your chart. Because any risks that are above your organizational tolerance, those are the ones you need decisions on. Any risks below the line that the organization can tolerate, those are accepted and they're acceptable for now. Because until they're above that line, there's nothing to do from a business perspective. And if you can't express a risk as above a tolerance, then very little is going to happen. Think about Equifax. They knew there was a patch available and nobody did anything. Why was that? It's probably because part of that risk did not exceed their risk tolerance. Something else we need to define are the business owners of those risks. Remember my example where I said I can't tell our senior sales VP how much of a risk the sales system costs, and as a CISO, I don't own the sales system and don't own the risks. Yeah, every one of those risks above the tolerance line, that needs to have a business owner. And every one of those business owners needs to make decisions about what to do with those risks that they now own, and they might not have thought when they got into work that day that they now are a risk owner. So the first thing they can go do is they can accept the risk, say it's fine. Like all those risks below the tolerance line, that's accepted. Any risk where you don't make a decision, that's accepted. And any risk where the business owner thinks it's fine, or maybe it's not a big deal in spite of the organization's risk tolerance, that's also accepted. Something else they can do is try to transfer risk. And often this involves cyber insurance, saying they'll just use the company's insurance to absorb the fallout. Remember Equifax? They had a $115 million settlement. Now, sure, insurance might have covered some of that. That $1 billion in additional controls, your insurance company is not going to pick up that bar tab. Final thing a company can do is mitigate a risk, which means choose controls to reduce either the probability of the risk or the impact of the risk, or both. I prefer those myself that reduce impact because those improve business resilience, and most modern standards and attestations and contractual obligations like the EU's DORA, they require resilience. But we can't mitigate all the risks. We have to be choosy. And again, here's what you want to do. You want to write down those decisions. You want to write them down in the risk register. Who made a decision? What was the decision? When was the decision? And when's the next time you're actually going to go reevaluate that decision and see if it still makes sense? And some of you are probably thinking, well, I've tried that. I presented the risks to the executives and they just accept the risks anyway. So you have this weird revolving door situation where the same risks get accepted yearly and nothing changes. So here's what you do. You update your risk acceptance procedures to force the business leader to buy short-term insurance to cover the risk materializing, the breach costs, the investigation costs, the legal fees, the customer notification fees, and so on and so forth. Suddenly, when they accept the risk, it now hits their profit and loss statement for their business division. That's where you can have a conversation about how mitigating the risk is often cheaper than actually just buying the insurance and taking the P&L hit. Another common objection is when they don't want to make a decision or they don't want to write down their decision. How do we fix that? So can we talk about key performance indicators? It's how executives get measured, and it's how they get bonuses. Executives care about KPIs, but that's what's not great about them is they're a lagging indicator. You can tell if you hit your goal only after you've hit your goal. It kind of sucks. You can track progress maybe, but it's hard to predict it until you know that you've actually cleared your goal. So key risk indicators, though, that's data we can show if a KPI is more or less likely to happen. They're a leading indicator. They're often based on security data and business data, and we can tie our KRIs to our KPIs to make our executives more interested in investing in business resilience and risk reduction. I'll give you an example. An HR leader I once worked with had a goal of employee happiness. Her goal, her KPI, would pay her enough to put in a new swimming pool at her house. So she really wanted people to be happy, right? That was her number one goal is people get to be happy, she gets a swimming pool. Good job, everybody, right? Here's the thing. Published research says when people are considering quitting, they tend to take copies of all their data, or what they think is their data. A list of customers, their manufacturing plans, their business plans, source code, pretty much theft of all the company's intellectual property that they somehow think is theirs. And they go upload that to the public cloud, or they email it to themselves or whatnot. Odds are an employee considering leaving is probably an unhappy employee. So our KRI is data exfiltration. If it goes up, we can predict people are probably more unhappy. Maybe they're just violating your company's AI policy, which is the whole secondary class of risk that we could tie a control to. And if people are unhappy, odds are KPI, employee happiness, is going down. And we're not saying data exfiltration is causing a lack of employee happiness either. We're just using it to predict it. And this is where we can suggest controls, like maybe a data loss prevention system that could either discourage or prevent data exfiltration. And that doesn't just improve our KRI, it also protects against other risks that I haven't listed. And we can have the HR leader and other leaders fund that project for us so we can apply a technology control that they might not have previously known about, or maybe they ignored it, but it has to be tied back to their KPI. But again, write that down. Get them to write down their decision, like using DLP to measure the risk of declining employee happiness or the loss of intellectual property or source code. So you have evidence that the CISO didn't just come up with this one weird idea. because we can't apply that control after all. The business owners need to apply the control to their systems. And this is where we get to residual risk. We got risks, we got controls, we make decisions, and now we need to figure out, does any of this stuff actually work? So let's propose some controls, like maybe add some people. Maybe we add a vulnerability management program. Maybe we add advanced monitoring. You'll notice all these have got some guesses of costs and likelihood of impact reduction estimates. That's cool. How do you actually prove to anybody that this works? And this is where you want to be friends with the internal audit committee. There are two reasons for this. First up, it's a lot cheaper than hiring pen testers or red teamers or offensive security or an AI when you're just doing a regular risk assessment. And second of all, this is actually what they do. They can measure control effectiveness for us, and they're kind of expected to do it as part of their day job. For them to do that, though, they need to know which controls they're measuring, and we'll need to have associated those controls with the risks that they're meant to mitigate. So here we've taken our top risk, H3, and applied those three proposed controls to it. And remember, controls can help mitigate multiple risks, though those aren't shown here. And what internal audit wants is evidence that a control is being operated. You can automate the collection of it because it's often like screenshots or PDFs, and the SecOps team, honestly, they don't have the time or the motivation to go collect it. But if a control doesn't have evidence that it's working, you can't reduce your risk impact or probability because you don't have any evidence that it's actually doing the thing you said it was going to go do. And at some point, you have to go show this to your board of directors. Justify all those controls and all that time you spent doing all this risk assessment and all this planning and all this control implementation. How do we do that? So when we present our risks to the board, we want to lead with how did the organization manage how much risk over what period of time at what cost for controls. Now you need to have backup slides too, showing your KRIs and their association KPIs, but that's it at a high level. And you'll see some details on the slide here about how a risk went above a tolerance level and how the organization got it back within their tolerances. So we've been through just slightly over 100 slides here. And before we get to questions, some of you are probably still wondering, like, how do you take action? Like, how would you conduct a risk assessment or build a risk management process? I want to talk about that, including deciding if this is something you need to do anything about. So this chart, and it's going to be available via the QR code to download, helps organizations evaluate how effectively they've integrated their cybersecurity risk within broader risk or enterprise risk management. And it helps you identify specific improvement opportunities. And this should be used during like strategic planning or before you take a new security initiative, or maybe as part of an annual security program assessment. And there's also a scoring guide for it. But for this to be really effective, I'd say you should have security and business leaders like complete the assessment independently and then compare the results. Because that way we can then start to focus our improvement efforts on the dimensions with the largest gaps between your current state and your desired state. And if you think it's time to start talking to the business about these risks, not just security risks, here's an outline for a half-day workshop that you can run at your organization. Full version, again, in the downloadable materials from the QR code, including my notes on how to prepare for this workshop. Again, though, that's based on the outcomes of the prior scoring. If your organization isn't ready to do this, like you'll want to get executive sponsors before you're like, hey guys, we're going to do a workshop. It'll be fun, right? Now that's about all I had time for, but I want to give you some more. I mentioned the download at the end. I just want to quickly preview like what that is for everybody, right? So it's got the best slides as well as some process documentation in order for you to get started, as well as those workshops, as well as some scoring guides in there. So before we wrap up and go to questions, just as a show of hands, was this useful for anybody? Like, this is new material. This is the first time anybody on earth has ever seen this presentation. Like, you are first. So if you found this to be useful, go ahead and just put a yes. I see a hand raised already. I don't know if that's a question. I see a few people. I saw a few people in there also say that they were triggered by this. It reminded them of the CISSP exam. Sorry, not sorry. So here's what I want to do. I want to give everybody an opportunity to share that really good feedback with the event organizers who took a risk of putting me on stage. It'll take you less than 2 minutes. At the end of the survey, you're going to get a copy of all the best slides out of the deck, like the workshops, the questionnaires, the sample risk statements, the sample risk register, and process definitions for how do you do any of this stuff without reading NIST 830. And the evaluation and the workshop, they're from a book that I'm working on to get published. They're not actually available anywhere else. So I'll give everybody just a minute or two there Sauce gives me a chance to get a sip of water. And just scan the code or talk.ac/Kayne, and the code is quick. And I think we might have time at the end for questions. I promised 30 minutes, and we're at 28 minutes and 53 seconds.
You have time for questions. We've got
Awesome.
we've got about 15 more minutes left, and then afterwards I have a couple things for
Cool,
the
cool.
chapter, but you absolutely have time for questions.
Wonderful. I hope everybody scanned the QR code at this point. So I'll start to wrap up here. So at the start of the presentation, I kind of asked everybody, like, what do you think cyber risks are for realsies here? And we talked about what it takes to define risks to the business, as well as how to talk to executives about those risks, including how to get them to care and how that they can actually make decisions about those risks. Thank you, Dincy. I appreciate that. With that, I think we've got time for a few questions. So other than the link for the CPE, I don't have that one, but go ahead, ask me anything, and I will try my best to answer.
I'll ask. I'll start it out. All right. So there's a couple
Oh, put up the
things.
QR code again. I'll put that back up. There we go. Yep. Go ahead.
So how do you think it would have changed? So GLBA was updated last year, right? In 2024. Was it 2024 2023?
It took a little while,
I
but it came
can't tell
final in
what year it is.
2024.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So like how do you think that would have changed the response to that one particular situation based off of GLBB? And it's a lot more, their final rule is, of course, um, I'm in higher ed, so of course that changed higher ed landscape quite a bit.
Right.
But how do you think it would have changed anything at all? I mean, for example, like FERPA, it's just like another regulation. Obviously, has nothing to do with this, but it's 40 years old. It's very vague, and nobody gives crap. So, do you think it would have made any difference? More, exacting regulation.
Not for Equifax, no, because they're the ones who got in trouble with GLBA. And the reason why is their business model. So the GLBA dates in 2024 were predominantly for broker dealers. And so, like, I always think there's a furniture store near my house, and they do credit. Like, if you can't afford to buy a couch, like, walk in and go, I want that couch, put it in my house, they will give you credit. And right now under GLBA and 2024, you're actually required to do some stuff around the cybers to make sure that you're not just like YOLOing their credit card information into your text file called creditcards.txt. That didn't exist in 2017 when Equifax's breach happened. And even if it did, Equifax wouldn't have been a regulated entity under that perspective. So even though there were some prescriptive things, like the way that the attorneys got the GLBA and the FTC violations was indirect. I think some of this legislative change we've seen in the past 7 years certainly helped, but it hasn't improved anything. But here's the other thing. I'm not pro-regulation. I'm not like, hey, we should get some more regs here and some more laws. I often tell my CISO friends, like, when stuff comes up in the Federal Register, like, please assign somebody at your company to go yell about that to the agency that's in charge. Because if we don't stand up and say that regulation doesn't make sense, what we end up getting is regulations that are written by mostly well-intentioned people, lawmakers and so forth, who then get engagement with lobbyists who are always trying to pull up the ladder behind their companies so that they don't have to do the thing. And we lose our voice. So I really think it's important for folks to get involved with the process, whether it's extraterritorial, like we see out of the European Union, or whether it's domestically, because until we do that, we're going to keep seeing more of these laws that don't make it easy for anybody. I hope that helps, Sharon.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I personally use regulation a lot to bludgeon people who will not do what I tell them they have to do. It's just
That's
easier for
fair.
me. It's an easier
That
path,
is.
right? But it would be nice if I do complain a lot about the regulations because there are quite a few of them that I have to deal with. And it would be nice if, yes, they made sense. They were
Wouldn't it
actually
be?
prescriptive, right? They fix the problems that we actually have. Like, I would love for that to be the case. It's not. but it would be nice if that were the case. I just kind of use it, but like I said, I use it as a tool to bludgeon researchers. That's all I use it for.
Yeah, it can be helpful, but it's not. I'd rather we do security for the right business reasons rather than doing it for security's sake or rather than being forced into
Yeah,
it because
but
nobody likes
except that
being
nobody will
forced into
do it.
doing anything.
Yeah.
No one will do it if you don't force them to do it.
Money
It's
is
just a fact. It's a
money is
fact
a
of yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, they have, I mean, for so long they couldn't even bother to do any security until they got, until they got breached or until they, until there was any type of a ransomware attack, and all of a sudden it's important, right?
This is true.
I learned that
Um,
they did like higher security for their paying customers, but when it was the regular folk, they went a little on the cheap side.
yeah, of course.
Very true, Ken.
Yeah.
So the other
I
question I
see a
have,
question. Oh, sorry, I saw a
oh no,
question
no, no. If
in the
there's a
chat I
question
wanted to
somewhere,
take. Yep.
go for it.
So
Go
the
for it.
question is from Disney Paul, and the question is, what triggers will add or remove an item from the risk register? So the thing that matters here is not what I'm about to say, other than the word consistency. If you remember nothing else, remember the word consistency, because when you define your process of here's like we review our risks. I had a client once that reviewed their risks every 10 years. It blew my mind. And then I have other customers that I've worked with over the years who review every 3 months, quarterly, right? Provided you follow your process consistently, whatever your process is, good times are had by all. As soon as you stop following your process, as soon as the process breaks down, if you have a material event as defined by the Securities and Exchange Commission, or alternatively, if you have a breach as defined by common folk, the litigation, the plaintiff's counsel is going to go look and say, were you following your processes, yo? And as soon as you don't, they're going to over rotate into that. And you're going to have a bad time on a basis of they'll say, well, you didn't do a risk assessment. You said you were going to do a risk assessment every 6 months. You didn't do one. Clearly, that's the cause for this, irrespective of technology. That's what we tend to get into trouble with. So when a risk goes in or out from the risk register, some people that's like it crosses a threshold. Some people say it's based on a time delineation. Some people have risks that have finite duration. Some have risks that stop existing because, well, they no longer do it. Like if you're, I don't know, making medical devices in the United States and you decide you want to go into the EU or the UK, and then you back out of that and go, wow, that was a wild and terrible adventure, you'd pull those risks out. But again, you have to have a defined process there so that you can say, yeah, we did the thing. The other thing I'd say, it makes it fair for all of the executives involved. Like, we cannot assume that a bunch of folks who got an MBA understand how to do risk management. That's intellectually unfair to them. And if you think about it, like, let's say you told somebody, I need you to bake a cake and it needs some flour and it needs some eggs and here's some vanilla. And you need to have that done by Friday. And that's the only information they have. A lot of people are either going to put it off or they're going to try and outsource it, or they're just not going to do it. And when we fail to give other executives an intellectual foundation for doing risk management, and we fail to give them a process by which they're expected to do it, they're people like us. They put their pants on in the same way as this in the morning, right? One leg after the other. They're going to go, I don't know how to do this thing. I'm not going to do it. And that's, again, where we get process breakdowns. We have to give them the tools to be successful. I'll get down off my high horse there for a minute there.
No, that's okay. I've got soapboxes. Carl made a good point. Proactive security is often a thorn in the backside. Reactive security is a blame game. Correct. You are correct.
Unfortunately, very true. Are there
So
other questions? Oh, go
I'm
ahead, Sarah.
curious how you feel about so I'm currently, I got it today, received the latest ransomware supplemental for the cyber insurance application that we do every year. Or I should say risk hands to me and says, here you go. They ask the dumbest questions. Do you see or do you feel that's going to change at all? And it's the whole cyber insurance industry is amazing.
I think that cyber insurance is, gosh, I remember 20 plus years ago, I went and met an actuary for the very first time, and lovely gentleman. He had a clock on his desk and it counted backwards. And it was this black clock. And I wish that it like had a scythe or a Grim Reaper or something cool. It was just this black clock that counted backwards. And it was how long he had until he'd die. Very cheerful person in spite of that. He had worked all the actuarial tables, had all the maths, and said, this is what's going to happen because there are known factors. There are only so many ways a person can die, and he calculated it all out. In the cybers, we don't have actuarial tables yet. And the reason we don't have them, like if you think about, I don't know, I live in a house. Weird, right? I don't live in a cardboard box under an overpass yet, working on it. Here's the thing. There's only so many ways a house can burn down. They've written that stuff down, right? There are only so many ways you can have a house fire. So when I do my house insurance, they can figure out, yeah, here are your odds of having a house fire. They're pretty low, right? When you go apply for cyber insurance, how many different ways can you have an initial attack vector? Especially when threat actors, this is their day job, right? There are people in government offices who drink really bad coffee, who have insurance plans, who have healthcare plans, and they just go attack companies and countries because that's their job. They have to innovate new techniques. The problem in cyber insurance is they cannot account for the clip by which things are happening, because that level of innovation, whether it's an APT crew or whether it's a criminal actor, again, either way, it's hard to track all the innovation that's happening in that space, which is why cyber insurance companies often go to what you said of like, what controls do you have? Because we think these help. I mean, Marsh and McLennan's got what? I think 12 factors that they go ask for. But again, it's very reactive and it doesn't take innovation into account. I think eventually we're going to get there, but cyber insurance like is new in the past decade. I remember when you could spend about $5 for $1 million worth of coverage. You ain't going to get that deal anymore, right? They've realized that it's hard to track. So I think it will improve, but they're going to need a lot more data on incidents. And like when we had the CSIRB, the Cybersecurity Incident Review Board, up till last year, that was really good because it would give us a fair accounting of here are the things that happened, here's how they happened, and here's what to do in response. Without those data, it's very hard to make informed decisions.
Thank you. Any other questions from the
Well,
audience?
thanks everyone. I really do appreciate this. Again, brand new presentation. So always fun to run these things out in the world.
Wonderful. We appreciate having you. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. So,